What if you were born into a world where you had no choice but to rely on your parents, your school, and the very systems built to protect you, but every single one of them failed? That's what happened to 8-year-old Relisha Rudd in 2014. And she didn't live in some isolated small town. She lived right in the heart of America's power, Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. A place where laws are written, where leaders claim to fight for children, and where safety nets are supposed to exist. But for Relisha, those safety nets were full of holes. Over the course of this video, I'm going to tell her story and show you how she was failed at every single level. Relisha Tenau Rudd was born on October 29, 2005 in Washington, D.C. Her mother, Shamika Young, was struggling to provide stability. Her stepfather, Antonio Wheeler, was working out of the area during the months leading up to her disappearance. Despite being only 8 years old, Relisha was already described as a caretaker for her 3 younger brothers. Even as a child herself, she had been forced into a role of responsibility far beyond her years. In 2013, Relisha and her family entered the D.C. General Family Shelter on 1900 Massachusetts Avenue, Southeast. This wasn't built for families. It was a shuttered hospital closed in 2001, then hastily converted into a homeless shelter in 2007. The intended capacity was about 270 to 300 families. The reality? There were regularly over 1,000 people crammed inside, including 600 to 700 children. That made it one of the largest concentrations of homeless kids in the country. Inside, conditions were shocking. Outbreaks of lice, bed bugs, and rodents were common. Respiratory illnesses spread through the halls. Heat and hot water often failed. Families described it as a warehouse for the poor. In 2013, advocacy groups released a public report about the shelter. Infestations, overcrowding, a lack of safety, a lack of privacy. These problems weren't a secret. They were known, and yet very little changed.
CFSA.
One of the interesting things about Relisha's story is that so much of it is cyclical. So her grandmother experienced trauma, her mother experienced trauma, her stepfather experienced trauma.
Even before Relisha's family moved in, the city's own Office of Inspector General had flagged serious safety failures at D.C. General. Among their findings, many staff files lacked FBI and MPD background checks even though the law required them. A shelter manager had actually lied to inspectors about completing background screenings. Out of 65 employee files reviewed, 16 had no background checks at all. 17 had no record of drug or alcohol screening. 3 out of 4 were missing reference checks, and several employees had felony convictions. All of that, and also warnings from Shamika's own family to Shamika.
I told her, my grandfather told her before he passed on, my mom told her, keep him away from Relisha. You know, it's just, my mother, he's getting too fond of Relisha.
These weren't clerical errors. They were red flags that were ignored. In the next part of Relisha's story, we'll cover how she met Tatum, how the shelter staff looked the other way, and how her school and child protective services ignored warning after warning until it was too late, because Relisha's disappearance didn't happen overnight. It was the end result of years of systemic failures.
Social workers were aware of problems with Relisha Rudd and her family well before the 8-year-old girl was reported missing to police.
Poverty and homelessness safety nets in DC were overstretched and underfunded, leaving kids like Relisha in dangerous environments. The DC Family General Shelter was overcrowded. A facility only rated to house roughly 1,000 people had nearly 800 children living there, and that's not counting their parents or any other family. The city had directed the shelter contractor to repair broken plumbing, unsafe electrical wiring, unsecured areas, and infestation problems after multiple inspections. And what they didn't fix, toilets, pipes, and sinks remained broken. Exposed electrical outlets in common areas stayed unprotected. Mice, roaches, bedbugs, and spiders were still rampant. Sensitive resident files were found unlocked and exposed, violating privacy protections, and much, much more. Who was responsible for all of this? Well, the building itself was on government land, but the day-to-day workings and hiring of staff and the one responsible to make sure that they complied with local laws was contracted out to a private nonprofit, though I use that term very loosely here, called the Community Partnership for the Prevention of Homelessness, or TCP for short. From everything I've been able to look up on TCP, it does not paint a great picture. They just ignored everything they were told to fix, doing so while working under a government contract worth millions. And this isn't the only facility that they operated, nor was it the first or last time that they were found to be just ignoring oversight. But it wasn't just on them. On paper, there were two watchdogs that were supposed to keep DC General safe. The first was the Office of Shelter Monitoring, or OSM. Their job was to inspect DC General and make sure the operators, TCP, were following the rules. But here's the reality. OSM was so understaffed that at one point there was only a single inspector responsible for monitoring all 65 shelters across the city. That's one person for every single shelter in DC. Then there was the Office of Inspector General, or OIG. They audited DC General and TCP multiple times, and every time they flagged major problems, like missing staff background checks and security failures. But here's the problem. Neither OSM or OIG had the teeth, the funding, or the power to actually enforce change. They could write reports, they could point out red flags, but the city kept the same contractors in place, ignored the warnings, and let the same dangerous conditions continue. And that's the world Relisha was living in when she disappeared. That's the world she was living in when she met a monster from every parent's nightmares. Now we need to talk about the man at the center of this case. The man who groomed Relisha, who manipulated her family, and who became the last person seen with her. His name was Khalil Malik Tatum. Khalil Tatum was 51 years old in 2014. He grew up in Washington, D.C., and he had a long criminal record. We're talking burglary, larceny, and firearms charges, and more. A history that should have made him ineligible to work anywhere near children. And yet, somehow, Tatum was hired as a janitor at the DC General Family Shelter. That job gave him daily access to hundreds of vulnerable kids, including Relisha. People inside the shelter said Tatum was known for giving gifts, money, and food to families, all things that should have gotten him fired per DC General's own SOPs. He would take children on trips, he would hand out toys, and at first glance, it looked like generosity, but it wasn't kindness, it was grooming. It was a predator building trust with children and desperate parents. Relisha's mother, Shamika Young, trusted him enough to let Relisha spend time with him. To her, he seemed like someone who cared about her daughter when the system didn't. In reality, he was exploiting that trust. On March 1st, 2014, surveillance cameras caught Relisha walking into a Holiday Inn Express in Northeast DC with Tatum. That's one of the last confirmed sightings of her alive. To the outside world, Tatum was even lying about who he was. When Relisha's school started asking about her repeated absences, the staff were told she was under the care of Dr. Tatum. Teachers believed it. They accepted the excuse. No one at the school verified who this so-called doctor actually was. And while everyone looked the other way, Tatum kept Relisha out of school, and out of sight. By the time a social worker finally flagged her as missing on March 19, 2014, Relisha had already been gone for weeks. Police issued an Amber Alert the next day on March 20th, but by then Tatum was already unraveling. That same day, he murdered his wife, Andrea Tatum, shooting her in a hotel room in Prince George's County, Maryland. He then disappeared into Kenilworth Park. On April 1st, 2014, police found him dead by suicide, and Relisha was nowhere to be found. To this day, she has never been located, and here's the most painful part. Tatum should never have been in that shelter in the first place. DC law required full FBI and MPD background checks for employees working around children. Those checks would have revealed his criminal past, but the shelter operator never enforced it. The city never enforced it. And because of that failure, a convicted felon had free access to vulnerable families and to Relisha Rudd. In 2013, the family moved into the DC General Family Shelter, a place already notorious for unsafe conditions. This was the same shelter where janitor Khalil Tatum worked, and where he first began grooming children like Relisha. I'm going to go back over a few things in this timeline that I've already covered. The timeline in this case is a bit weird, so I'm going to try and break it down and clear things up. By 2013, advocacy groups were publicly warning about DC General's overcrowding, infestations, and unsafe environment for children. The city knew. The problems were documented, but no one fixed them. Fast forward to February of 2014. Relisha was attending Payne Elementary School. She had already missed a lot of school. On February 25th and 26th, she was marked present, but after that, she never returned to class. When the absences started piling up, the school accepted excuses from a man they thought was her doctor. That man was Khalil Tatum. He obviously was not a doctor. He was a janitor with a criminal record, but no one at the school ever checked. On March 1st, 2014, cameras caught Relisha walking into a Holiday Inn Express in Northeast DC with Tatum. This is the last confirmed video evidence of her alive. Over the next 2.5 weeks, Relisha did not return to school. She did not appear at the shelter, but no official report was filed. During this period, she was missing, and nobody in authority noticed. You're probably asking, why didn't her mother report her missing earlier? Why did she also cover for Khalil when the school asked her where she was? Shamika Young's own family wanted to know what was going on and why she hadn't been reported missing much earlier. When asked if she blamed Tatum at all, Young responded, "I choose not to answer those questions." It wasn't until March 19, 2014 that a school social worker finally flagged the case and contacted Child Protective Services. That's when Relisha Rudd was officially reported missing. On March 20th, police issue an Amber Alert for Relisha, but by then, everything was already spinning out of control. That same day, Khalil Tatum murdered his wife, Andrea Tatum, shooting her in a hotel room in Prince George's County, Maryland. He then disappeared into hiding. Between March 21st and March 30th, the FBI joined the case. Investigators searched hotels, shelters, and parks all across the region, but there was no sign of Relisha. On April 1st, 2014, police found Khalil Tatum's body in Kenilworth Park, DC. He had shot himself, and once again, Relisha was nowhere to be found. To this day, Relisha Rudd has never been located. The FBI still offers a reward for information. Her family and the community hold vigils every March to keep her name alive. And in 2018, the city finally closed the DC General Family Shelter, replacing it with smaller facilities. But none of that brought Relisha back. This timeline makes one thing painfully clear. Relisha's disappearance didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because at every step, her family, her school, the shelter, Child Protective Services, and the city, someone failed to act. By the time anyone realized she was gone, it was already too late.
And today is Relisha Rudd Remembrance Day. She is the 8-year-old who went missing 11 years ago in the district. Footage from a Holiday Inn Express in Northeast DC. The man she was seen with was 51-year-old Khalil Tatum, staying as a janitor. Suspect that he was involved in her disappearance. Investigators say he shot and killed himself. Relisha would have been 20 years old today.
And help bring attention to causes that help all of us, please like, subscribe, and share. And don't forget to check out my other channels listed on screen.